All right, we're back. So what I got going on here is I've created this wooden buck, I guess, or hammer form, or whatever you want to call it. It's really just made out of multiple pieces of this MDF wood, and I've drawn this profile line on each one of them, cut them out, and glued them all together so they're roughly the same shape. I started out trying to block sand everything flush and nice and smooth, but I realized I was going to be cutting out half of them anyway to be able to form the arch, and so I decided I might as well cut away what I don't need and then sand everything smooth later. And so what I've got is this dark line here is the outside edge of the fender that was represented on my paper template that's on the truck. And so to create the tool that's going to form the bead and the edge bending of that piece of metal, I stepped that line in by 0.525 inches, or 525 thousandths. And so I essentially just created a little, compass with a pencil at 525, and I marked all along the edge of this black thick line to get this new line that's kind of over here, and that's what I'm going to cut out. And so that when I cut that out, I can reinforce the edge with a thickness of 120 wall steel that will create the actual edge that this patch panel is folded over. And then in addition to that, there's another 35 or 350 thousandths worth of an inch to create the bead that goes along that edge, and so that distance is what makes that up. So I don't have a bandsaw. I'm going to try and cut it with a sawzall. All right, here we go. My saw blade, I think, is getting clogged up with MDF. That may be what the problem is. Yep, that's not gonna work. That does not work. All right, attempt number 2. There's really no good way to do it other than a bandsaw, and so I went and picked one up and put it together, and I did a test cut here, and it works really well. So I'm gonna do my actual body line cut here, and then we'll block sand the surface smooth, and then I'll explain what the plan is after that. All right, here we go. I don't know if you could see it, but the whole time this thing was wobbling, and so I may have to create a sturdier base because that's really annoying. So that's what you get with Harbor Freight sometimes. Otherwise, the bandsaw's pretty decent. It was if I had to review the setup was a mess. The sheet metal the stand is so thin that it's almost razor sharp, so you wear gloves. I got a whole bunch of cuts all over me. The instructions were only half useful. The pictures were more useful than the description. Half of the parts were kind of already assembled with the screws, and so you had to take out the screws to be able to install the part and then put the screws back in, so that was a pain, even though the directions said all the screws were in separate bags. That's a little cheap and chintzy, but it works. It works much better than my sawzall, so I'm pretty happy about that. So maybe I'll do a review of that later after I've used it. got my little wooden hammer form buck. That's the shape of my fender patch that I'm going to be fabricating. And so one thing I learned, or I was concerned early on about, was whether this MDF was going to be strong enough to be able to take, you know, thousands of little hammer blows. And so my plan was, originally I cut this back, or increased this radius back just enough for an 11 gauge piece of steel that I can bend to that curvature, cut out to the profile, and then use that to make sure I get a really crisp edge to hammer the sheet metal against. And it's really good because as I was kind of trying to form this with some heat and some light hammer blows, a little chunk of my corner came off, and so it actually looks like it's even moving off a little bit. The glue is starting to shift, so I want to make sure I get this clamp back down where it needs to be. So I'm glad I did that. And so you can kind of see I've got some shears to cut this sheet metal to the profile I want it, and then I've got 3 more pieces of 11 gauge steel that when I stack them up here give me 350 thousandths of an inch, or I think it's just a little bit over. But and so what those are is those are going to be, this little bead or step down here is 0.35 inches between where it's really hard to hold the camera steady, where this edge comes in and this edge is, so that's 0.35 millimeters on the inside. And so I'm going to step down those 3 extra pieces of sheet metal. I think the step down is, I think it's 1/8 of an inch or just under. So I'm going to do that. What I'll do is, we'll just forget the tripod for now. Once I cut this piece of steel along here to that profile, I will set the other pieces of steel in here. I'll have to bend them to the right curve, and then I'll mark, or get a little scribe and mark them down, whatever that 1/8 of an inch or whatever it happens to be dimension is, and I'll measure that really carefully once I'm there, and then I'll build that out 0.35 millimeters, 0.35 inches, and then we'll trim all those out, so they'll match that same curve, but be, you know, 0.1 inches lower. And so that, I think, is what we're going to use as the hammer form. And so one of the questions I'm going to have to work out, or one of the details, is once that piece of sheet metal is over the top of here, is how to keep it there and not allow it to shift while I'm hammering on it. And so one idea is to drill a couple holes in the panel and screw it in to the wood, because the wood's really not doing a whole lot except for just holding things in place, and it's actually using it's a way for me to know where the surfaces are, and maybe even clamp it down. And so that was one of the other ideas, is to, if you create another version of this piece of wood that's the opposite, or the mating version of that, you can clamp that down with a whole bunch of clamps and grab a hold of the sheet metal. I'm not sure I trust that to hold it that well, and so I may try and do something else.